Hi, so today's Legal 101, being a Wednesday, is family and succession law, but it has a strong leaning to criminal law. Now, I don't know if you remember the Legal 101 last week on Wednesday, where we mentioned that parents have a duty to protect their children from neglect, abuse, discrimination, or other differential treatment. So that is kind of a development of that video. Now, specifically on defilement and how it affects children and caregivers, this is what a study that was done by Kenyatta National Hospital in Nairobi Women's Hospital between June 2015 and July 2016 revealed. That one, defiled children experience negative outcomes in their day-to-day activities. For example, you will suddenly notice as a caregiver the poor academic performance, you'll notice low self-esteem, you'll notice depression, you'll notice that they carry shame or they are teased with their classmates, and therefore they retreat in the way they show up in the world. If they were jovial, now they are guarded. Now they're sad. If they are jovial, if they were outgoing, now they are guarded. And the report also noted that these children might contract an STI, e.g. HIV and AIDS, might fall pregnant, might get into drugs to cope, and might be involved in other criminal offenses, including drug trafficking. Now, it was also noted that child victims of repeated defilement did not report. It's therefore no wonder that such a child would harbor suicidal thoughts or would commit suicide. And that brings me to this case by Justice Odera. It's a decision in the High Court, a 2023 judgment. But before that, let me just let you know the punishment for defilement. Now, if somebody defiles a child of 11 years and below, the punishment for that is a life sentence. But the jury is still out on the constitutionality of life sentences. The matter is before the Supreme Court, and I will tell you what the Supreme Court eventually decides. But this is what the Court of Appeal said. It said when a person is convicted and a mandatory sentence, such as a life sentence, is given to them, then it means whatever they say to mitigate that situation will not work. And the argument was that if any other offender, any other convict is allowed to mitigate, then it should be discriminatory for somebody who's been convicted and is likely to be sentenced for life, for them to lack that opportunity to mitigate. And the court agreed with their submission in the Court of Appeal that this is discriminatory. It is against the provisions of Article 27. It denies them the right to dignity and humane treatment. So now the matter is at the Supreme Court for the court to now decide whether or not it is unconstitutional to give somebody a life sentence. In my personal opinion, if you cannot do the time, don't do the crime. Now, defilement of a child between 12 and 15 years carries a sentence of not less than 20 years. And then lastly, defilement of a child between 15 and 18 years carries a sentence of not less than 15 years. Now in this case, the accused person was called Vincent Guia. He defiled a 14-year-old girl in 2020, was convicted for 10 years in prison by the magistrate, and then he appealed that decision because he was dissatisfied with the outcome of the case. Now the matter was now before Justice Odera. So these were the facts. He was a neighbor of the child. At around 1 p.m. on 26th of December 2020, he knocked on the door where this girl lived and asked for water. The girl gave him water, and then as soon as he had drunk the water, he barged into the house. He covered her mouth, her eyes, tied her, and then carried her to a vehicle that was parked outside, and there was a driver in that vehicle. They took her to a secluded places, and Vincent Guia defiled her, threatened to kill her if she told anybody, and abandoned her there. On 28th December of that same year, they met on the road, and he threatened her, he strangled her. Now, fast forward to 21st of January 2021, the head teacher of the school that she went, the primary school she went, was informed that she was writing a suicide note. And so upon inquiry, they found out that she had been defiled on the 26th of December. So then her parents were involved, and the man was arrested 4 days later. Now, The doctors now examined her as soon as this matter was brought to their attention, and they found that her hymen was broken. Of course, by this time, her clothes that she had worn on that day were no good. They'd been washed, and but nevertheless, there was enough evidence to pursue a charge of defilement against that man. Now, the defiler, of course, when he was put on his defense, denied the claims, and even said he had an alibi, that on that day he was at home the whole day, and that he had some beef with the girl's father, and he thought that she had been coached to say this about him. And he said that if there was even a driver, why did the prosecution call that driver to corroborate the story that was told by this girl? Now, the lower court, of course, considered all of this, and that is why he ended up in jail. He was sentenced to 10 years. But when he appealed, this is what now the Court of Appeal says, Justice Odera. He said, on corroboration, it is not mandatory in sexual offences, and this is the law under Section 124 of the Evidence Act. Sio lazima. If the accused person wants to say that a minor was coerced or coached, then they have to have evidence for that. Without that evidence, and if the child seems to be telling the truth, and that is discretionary to the magistrate or the judge, if the story is true, it's consistent, and the court is satisfied, then a conviction will stand or will be made. On the issue of alibi, the court said, okay, fine, anybody can raise a defense of alibi, but the weight that is to be placed on a defense of alibi is dependent on how soon it was raised. If you have waited for several months to now say I had an alibi, then naturally somebody would ask, were you trying to get somebody to actually agree that they were with you on that day? So the sooner you raise it, the earlier the investigation officer can go and confirm that indeed on that day of the incident, you were somewhere else. And if you wait too long, then we cannot trust you. And that's the same thing that the court said in this matter. The court said this issue of alibi was raised after the accused person was put on his defense. And you can imagine if all the prosecution witnesses are going to be called first, and then you're coming in later, so many months have passed, you've already seen how they are dealing with this case, you've looked at loopholes, so you're ready to now try to steer it in your direction. Now, and then lastly, on whether she was defiled, because actually the elements of defilement are that there must have been penetration, and the age of the child is to be considered, and then there must have been proper identification of the perpetrator. This is what the court said, that it is true that it took a while before this person was identified, but look at the facts. This is a child involved, there's trauma involved, there's threats involved. It is not far-fetched to think that somebody would be quiet based on these threats. So the court said, looking at the evidence in its entirety and noting that the victim's story remained consistent, which is something that's very important in a court of law, remaining consistent even during cross-examination when things are going crazy and the accused person or the advocate is raising pertinent questions against you as a victim. If you remain unshaken and the story remains believable and consistent, then a court of law is more likely to believe you. So the court said, in considering all of these things, the conviction was supposed to be upheld, and in fact added that the 10 years given were too kidogo. We have seen, and you can rewind this video to see, the minimum sentence for a person who defiles a child between the ages of 12 and 15 is 20 years. So the court said, in fact, you should have gotten 20 years, and I'm giving you 20 years. Okay, so I thought that was important to mention today. It's not particularly family law, but it leans, because it affects the lives of people. It affects the way people show up in the world. It affects the caregivers. I thought it was important to share it today. Okay, I hope that has helped you. I hope you can share it with somebody who needs it. Okay, so bye.